Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Billboard. I'm here with Greg Wise again. A lot of what we talk about for out-home advertising comes down to the planning process of what we do at OneScreen. That's our bread and butter. We use data to find the right locations and resources to figure out where to put your ads. But the other part of out-of-home to build a really successful campaign, the other 50% of that comes down to creative. What are you saying on the billboard? What does your billboard look like? What's the design look like? And that's really important, especially if you've never designed a billboard, never designed an ad for one. It can be intimidating. So let's talk, Greg, a little bit about the other side of how we work with brands on the creative side. Why is the creative process and that part of out of home? Why is that so important?
It's critical. I mean, you just nailed it. Half the battle is making sure the creative is on point. And when we say half the battle, meaning what actually drives success for a campaign. So I'll take a step back. I sort of equate this to people talk about health and wellness and the topic of losing weight. And people always talk about got to go to the gym, got to go to the gym. However, some may even argue 60 to 75% of it is diet. That's like the creative of out of home, right? So much of it is what you put on the billboard, what you put on the bus shelter, what you wrap a bus with. It's not even where, it's with what message. And a lot of marketers, especially performance oriented marketers, those of you who have never done out of home before, the canvas of the real world, although it seems simple, is straightforward, it's actually not. It's different than running creative on your meta ads or your other digital components. It is different. People act and behave differently in the real world. I'll give you an example. A billboard. When we work with clients, now we're not necessarily designing the creative. Given the marketplace that we do have creative directors and resources that we can pair clients with. But oftentimes we are consulting on the creative. So we plan the campaign and then we talk about the creative and there's a back and forth process. We actually have AI tools that we're building to help actually optimize creative and give feedback to our customers before we even launch. But I'm gonna give you an example. A billboard. We've seen billboard creative that has 10, 12, 15 words on it. That billboard might be placed on the Mass Pike here in Boston when people are going 80 miles per hour. They're not going to be able to read 10 words. They're not going to be able to read 7 words, 6 words. They might be able to read 3 to 4 words. So we want to keep that as simple as possible on a billboard like that. And it will depend on the format type. It will depend on the location of that format. Is it on a major thoroughfare? Is it on a surface level road? Is it at a corner, at a light where maybe people are stopped, maybe where there's added dwell time? All of those things should be taken into account. And then each one of those scenarios requires different attention to the creative. On a major thoroughfare, a 14 by 48 static bulletin, simple. That is your brand driver. Literally, your brand, like your logo, maybe a small tagline, and that is it. Within that same market, if you're using a bus shelter, for example, as a frequency format as part of that campaign, a bus shelter by default has more dwell time. You're getting pedestrian traffic, vehicular traffic, plus the folks that are quite literally at the bus stop. This affords you the opportunity to maybe be a little bit more detailed, to add a little bit more storytelling to your ad. But the idea is that they both work together. It's a cohesive story where the billboard on the major thoroughfare is bold, it's literal, it's clear, it is simple, it's eye-catching, the colors are bold, they stand out against the backdrop. The bus shelter is where you can tell a longer story. The idea is that if you're doing the planning correctly, which we do, your target customer is seeing both. Those are some of the nuances, Charlie, we see all the time is, hey, this campaign, we're excited about it. How the heck do we think about doing the creative?
Fun to unpack there, especially I love your analogy of diet versus I never heard that before, but that makes a lot of sense. I think it's the science and art of out of
Yeah.
home.
Yeah.
And the science is the planning that we do and figuring out, like you said, that huge billboard, but also we're going to recommend a transit ad because of the ICP who you're trying to talk to. And I think you nailed it in the sense of one, you need to be on brand on both of those applications and look and talk the same way you talk on your digital advertising or on your website or your landing page, but you do have more real estate to tell a different story there. But I think that's maybe the one place where, when everyone likes to say make the logo bigger, I think when you're looking at that 14 by 48, that probably is the place you want to make sure the logo is bigger, because you want someone, they've got a fraction of a second to remember something. And so hopefully they do remember your tagline. They maybe remember a really short URL or a call to action, but you're hoping they remember that you are that logo of who you are, because even subconsciously, when they go back to wherever they are, their office, their home, and they go and Google what that was or who you are, and we've seen that uplift in organic search traffic, that's the creative process you need to think about when it comes to how do you stand out, even if it's like from the repetitive standpoint, they're seeing the continuation of your story. So they may see that online, they may see it retargeted from an online or an out-of-home ad or somewhere else. They're seeing it multiple times where they remember it when they're ready to buy, they're ready to convert. Yeah, you brought up a lot of really great points. I think some of the things that you talked about in the sense of how far can you go when you're talking about telling a story differently on a transit ad or in different or smaller formats, especially when it comes to digital out of home, because you might have the ability to use video or you may have the ability to use something else. So can you talk a little bit about how far you can go or the options, maybe a little bit further on the options?
Absolutely. And you mentioned a lot there too. The one thing is, and I stress this a lot with folks that we work with, you don't have to think about telling the whole story on every asset in the real world. Right? It's like, I got to say everything that our company does. I got to put the entire value proposition on a billboard. Take a step back. Think of yourself as the person driving the car down the highway. Your intention is to make sure that person who you're trying to reach knows it's your company. Half the time, and now folks that are listening to this, you're going to drive down your local highway and you're going to see billboards that have way too much clutter, way too many words, maybe even different pictures. The logo doesn't have enough real estate. Maybe that they have this whole story, a bunch of text on the right hand side. And at the end of the day, all you know is that the billboard was ineffective, but you don't even know who it was from. You want to avoid that. The other thing to think about is all of this is intended to work together. Nothing with marketing is this standalone or should be in a standalone silo, right? And what we mean by that is out of home has its place, digital has its place, your landing pages have its place, your website has its place. In other words, if you do it correctly and your marketing mix is such that you can tell that complete story, well, you don't have to tell the whole thing in each one of those parts, right? They all play off of one another. That I think is just like fundamental marketing at its core, but that is the way that we like to help educate and talk through the creative. Digital, I'm glad you brought it up because digital is unique. There's digital out of home where your ad is like a static digital image that plays in rotation with other advertisers. Then there's full motion digital, which is actually ads that move on a particular unit itself. Two different things, two different unique opportunities, right? Digital itself, a digital static image, is really interesting canvas for marketers because you have the ability to change creative based off of time of day of the week, weather. That's what's really unique and fun about digital out of home is that you can actually change creative depending on the context and what's going on around the unit itself. So that's awesome. Full motion is an opportunity to tell that longer story. Literally think about that 10-second Instagram video that you did that you could actually literally repurpose in the real world. That is a place where you could potentially repurpose something that you've done on a digital channel. Now, the full motion doesn't exist in every place. You'll never see full motion on a major roadway, quite frankly, because it's just a traffic and a safety concern, as you can imagine. But you might see digital full motion in the middle of Times Square, where there's really not a lot of vehicular traffic. If you have that opportunity, go for it. But it will require video resources internally. So you want to think through that too.
Yeah, you mentioned a few things that from a creative consideration, QR codes. I know they've made a comeback, but you can't use them on billboards because it's illegal because You don't want someone getting into a car accident scanning a code. And I think that goes to, again, what you're asking people to do. You don't want a URL with .com/landing page/ like, make it really simple. Buy a redirect and you can track it that way. I think there's a lot of simple things there. But what are the things that I know when we talk to clients who are interested in considering out a home, they may have some unique creative ideas. How does that go into the topic, or the title of this podcast is Beyond the Billboard? How does the creative thinking, how does that go into our planning process? Besides just maybe a static billboard, can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the examples or how we go into our planning process based on someone's creative ideas?
Yeah. So it doesn't happen all the time, but oftentimes our customers will come to us with some sort of a baked out plan, a campaign. They know they're launching a product, and for a couple months, they've been building out the campaign concepts, if you will. That is really helpful because out of home is a brilliant way to use audience plus context. So if you know that the campaign creative is going to have certain types of components to it, that may actually affect the kind of plan or the kind of formats that are put in the plan that we recommend actually buying. I'll give you an example. This could be dependent on the type of brand, but it could be the product that's being launched or the product that's being sold. If it's got an edgy component to it, well, maybe wild postings, a wheat pasting may make a lot of sense. And those are like those urban posters that you see side by side, guerrilla style, typically in urban environments, eye level. And that's where like it's edgy, it's trendy, has that sort of handcrafted look. That might end up on a plan because the client comes to us with the concept already. Or let's say it's a really fun, cheeky, tongue-in-cheeky type of campaign. What I mean by that is maybe there's some serious creative chops and they want to have a really funny tagline. And maybe the objective of the out-of-home campaign is to have some sort of virality, get people talking about the campaign, about the product, about the business. That might dictate, hey, you know what? We're going to do a large digital spectacular in the middle of Times Square because this creative is really funny. It is super eye-catching. It actually will stop people in their tracks and get people talking. Or maybe we choose an iconic wallscape in a super strategic location because we know that if there's something funny on a wall in the middle of Soho, that it's going to have that virality component to it. Or maybe experiential comes into play. You're launching a product and the product will take sort of some of those ideas and we'll say, hey, you know what? An experiential activation, which is out of home advertising, makes a ton of sense for this campaign. Here are the components that will really highlight this campaign really well and marry what you're doing online with the offline.
When you're saying experiential, just for listeners to understand, because sometimes they may think of that as like a PR play, right? But street teams and like handing out creative ways to hand product out, things like that. Is that what you're talking about, Greg? Or are there other examples of that?
That's exactly it. Yeah, a lot of folks don't necessarily realize that experiential, it's a wrapped food truck. It is an Airstream that's custom built out. It could be a wrapped car that's giving free rides at an event. It could be a street team. It could be a sampling bike handing out product. All those things are technically out of home advertising and actually make me a big comeback in 2025 here. Experiential's getting a lot of steam. A literal example, for anyone who's interested, we're happy to send over the details, but we did a campaign for Ramp about a month ago for their treasury launch. And we quite literally dropped a wrecking ball on a Mercedes because it was one of those campaigns. And again, they came to us with the creative concept already baked out. It was like out with the old, in with the new, sort of like crushing the old way of doing things and ushering in the new way. So that was a perfect, almost literal representation of what that was. So that was really fun and that was experiential. And quite frankly, their campaign or their creative concepts dictated the plan. So that's actually a really literal example.
Yeah, that was a fun one to work on. I know that, like you said, some of those wraps, if you're doing a wrapped car, if you're doing wrapped handouts, if you've got great brand colors, you've got a great business, those can really stand out. You mentioned earlier AI tools to help with creative recommendations. Can you talk a little bit about how we can help? Creative team comes with some really great examples they'd use on a billboard, but we might give some suggestions to make it better. Can you give some examples of how we can give some thought to how to stand out even more on a billboard or on a transit ad, wherever that might be?
Yeah, absolutely. And you could imagine the world we live in, and of course, it's in our name, .ai. We are developing and testing out some new AI technology to take a piece of creative, take the location that it's going to be on, and then taking into account things like how high that, take the billboard as the example. How high off the road is that billboard? The height literally off the roadway. How far off the road is that billboard? What are the traffic patterns on a day-to-day basis? Is there an on-ramp or off-ramp after it? How many lanes of highway? How far of a read is it? Meaning, first of all, is it on the right-hand side? Is it on the left-hand side? How far does someone driving a car have an opportunity to actually visually see it? And the tool will actually take the creative and give you feedback on all of those elements. So just things like line of sight based on those parameters to say, you know what, your logo actually has to be 30% smaller and it should be on the top left, not the bottom right or not the top right. Your logo should be in the bottom left, not the bottom. You should have less than 5 words, and those words should be X% of the real estate across the 14 by 48 billboard. So that is actively being worked on. And that is part of the future here. The modernization of out of home is just to make that way more seamless for people.
Especially probably for design teams that have never done out of home before. You're used to doing digital ads. It's a different real estate. You've got a few inches on someone's screen to look at versus a wallscape, like you said, for example. Or how do you design? How cool would it be to do a sphere ad, but like the creative work that would need to go into that is insane. So it's different worlds. But yeah, a tool like that's helpful to help someone understand. We're building a plan to put your brand in front of the right audience, the right time, in the right frequency. We're going to optimize it as best as possible so they remember that. So that's a great point around how you not only, like this, again, back to the science and art thing. So any other thoughts on just closing points that someone who's considering out of home and thinking about, like, okay, how we've got some really great creative we've done before, or we're not sure how to think about creative from this standpoint. One takeaway that someone can think about as they think about planning a campaign from the planning standpoint, but more so on the creative side, like one best practice or one thought that a brand can think about.
Look at each individual location almost as a standalone canvas. That's where I would start. And the most literal example I can give you is a billboard on a major roadway versus wrapping buses. One is moving, one is not. But regardless of what and where, minimal, clean, uncluttered, period.
And it's always harder to be simple in marketing than to overcomplicate things. But that's a great point. And that's part of what we do. We help make some of those suggestions around not only where, but what to put on the billboard and how to optimize that. So thanks, Greg. This was great. Looking forward to talking about a little bit more about not only the planning side, but also talking about some really creative examples with companies we work with. So thanks for joining us, and I look forward to talking to you next time.